We had no internet, there were no computers, no cell phones, no technology.
So this is my mom, Wendy.
As soon as I turned 18, I was out of there and on my way to explore the world. I grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. Women were in very specific roles and they didn't see a purpose in me traveling. But when you grow up in a bubble and then you break free from that bubble and you discover infinite possibilities in the world, I had by far the richest experiences when I would travel solo.
You have like one tip.
Let go of all your fears, be circumspect, be brave.
Hello, welcome back, everybody. We have such an exciting guest today here. She's actually my mom. She is the OG solo female traveler. So this is my mom, Wendy.
Hello.
It's so exciting to have her here. She's actually traveling in Bali with me for 2 months. So she just came over. We got to get together and she really inspired me to travel. So this is all about her experiences in the 70s and 80s, and also her current traveling now is so different than when she started. So we're really just excited to hear about her perspective, and it's so different from ours.
Yes, thank you, Wendy, for being here. So I met Wendy like 1 week ago, and your story is just so inspiring, and I think you inspired everybody in the house here at the Lost Creator House. Like everybody, every time you tell your story, you talk, everybody's super interested in listening to you, and you have amazing travel stories. You're really inspiring, so we're really, really grateful to have you on the podcast today. Hopefully, the goal today is to have fun. So yes, and I think you guys will really, really fall in love with Emma's mom. Thank you, Wendy. So, Wendy, can you tell us a little bit about you, your story? How did you start solo traveling? Start from the beginning.
Well, I grew up in a very small town in Minnesota where we didn't really go anywhere except to the lake in the summertime. And I always read National Geographic and read about this big, beautiful world of ours and never really got to experience it. So by the time I got into college, I decided I was going to break free and go out and explore the world.
Okay, and then so you had this idea in mind, but I guess your parents, your family, your friends were not. What were they saying about this?
They just had no interest in it for themselves. And also I grew up in the 50s, 60s, and 70s when women were in very specific roles and they didn't see a purpose in me traveling. But I just had to do it. I love an adventure. I love to learn new things. I love to meet new people and see new places. And so as soon as I turned 18, I was out of there and on my way to explore the world.
Where was your first destination? How did you come up with your first trip?
My first trip was when I was 18 years old, and it was my first time on an airplane. I got my scuba diving certification from Patty
Nice.
and had to do my deep water dive to complete my certification. So I went to the Cayman Islands where I spent a week diving and getting my certification.
Wow.
So it was my first time on a boat. I'm sorry, on a plane.
On a plane.
Yes.
And then you went there and you did your scuba diving. How did you book the whole thing? Because I guess you couldn't book it online.
It was through my college, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, they had a program for interim, January interim, where you could get a scuba diving certification. So immediately I was on board.
That's amazing. So you arrived there and you were sleeping. Where were you sleeping? Did you had like everything planned on?
Yeah, there was a college professor who was in charge of it, the swim coach. And so we all went down as a group and stayed in a hotel and did both deep water dives, night dives. I went down 140 feet
That's
for my
amazing.
deep water dive, and it was just spectacular, and it opened up a whole new world for me to explore new places and see new things.
So you did your open and your advanced, open water and advanced course. Was it called like this?
It was just the certification course
Okay.
for Patty.
Okay,
Yeah.
so and then you can like scuba dive everywhere in the world.
I could potentially.
Yeah.
that was about 50 years ago. So
Yeah.
I might have to have a refresher course. But from there, then I ended up doing my junior year abroad in England
Yeah.
on a program, and then I backpacked all over Europe for 3 months, and then I worked on a farm in Norway. I lived with a family there and worked on a farm in Norway. But it was traveling was so different back then than what it is now. It wasn't common for people to travel at all, and in fact, in the 1970s, when I first started flying places, when you went to travel somewhere, we had no internet, there were no computers, no cell phones, no technology whatsoever. So you had to go to a travel agent who was set up by the government at the time, because all of these things were monitored. And for example, when I traveled to England, I went in to get a paper ticket, and they would say, do you want to go by ship or do you want to go by plane? And because the world was just transitioning. Before that, everyone just sailed somewhere. So you had a choice of going for a 3-week sail to England, or you could fly to England. They were both about the same price. They were about $500, which is about $3,000 in today's money.
Wow.
So it was very expensive. And also, when you traveled, for example, when I backpacked all over Europe, again, no GPS, no cell phone, and no resources whatsoever. We only had paper maps, if you could find a paper map, or else just a guidebook. And plus, there was no signage anywhere. Towns didn't have street signs, and they didn't have any directional signs whatsoever. So you had to follow a paper map and maybe turn at the rock or at the tree. And also keep in mind, the world's population was less than half of what it is today.
True.
And so there weren't that many people traveling. So everywhere you went, everywhere I camped, everywhere. And also, hitchhiking was extremely normal back then, ever since the war. People hitchhiked all over due to economic reasons. And so we just had to follow maps and basically ask people. Even in the 1980s, when I went to the Yorkshire Dales for my honeymoon, because I loved All Creatures Great and Small and James Herriot's books, we had a paper map. We wanted to see the little town where James Herriot had his veterinary practice and explore the area. And you had to ask people, because there weren't signs. There wasn't anything. You just had to kind of wing it and drive around till you found what you were looking for.
That's incredible.
Did people speak English back then when you were traveling? Was it as common as it is today? Because I feel like English is obviously my first language. It's Beatrice's second. But I haven't found it ever to be that big of an issue. And if it is, we're so lucky now to have Google Translate and so many ways to communicate if they don't speak English. How was it back then? Was that a difficult thing, or was it common as well?
There wasn't nearly as much English. Obviously, in England, I was fine. But then on the farm in Norway or traveling around Europe, we used primarily sign language and pantomime.
Just made up sign language?
Well, as in pantomime, like hungry, this kind of a thing or whatever. And so it was really word of mouth and just people helping people. But another thing that's interesting during these earlier days, for example, Europe was a common place to go and the most popular place to go. No one went to Asia at all back then, because the Vietnam War had been going on with Cambodia and Laos and China for almost 20 years. That started in 1955 and finally ended in 75 when I took my first trip. And ironically, a lot of people went to the Middle East. In fact, it was very popular with people my age to go work on a kibbutz in Israel. And so Israel, Lebanon, Iran, Iraq, all of those, it was a peaceful area at the time. And so people traveled there as well.
And what is a kibbutz? Is that just like a farm?
A kibbutz is like a commune where people, in fact, the kibbutz I was drawn to, they were digs, archaeological digs. So that is one of the things that had been on my bucket list that I did not do because in 1979, the year I graduated from college, that's when the Israel, I think it was a revolution or something, broke out. So it went on the back burner for a while.
That's so interesting. So we know you worked. I mean, listen, she's my mom.
You know a little
I
bit
know
about me.
like a lot of this, but it's so cool to get such a deep dive of it, and also just Beatrice and I, you know, we have such a different experience. We can read, we can see pictures of exactly what our hotel room or a hostel or Airbnb will look like. I can read hundreds of reviews, and you were telling me even just to communicate with your family, I probably FaceTime you once a day, let's be honest.
Yeah.
But you were telling me back when you would write, like my grandparents, you would have to send a letter.
Yes.
And it would arrive, what, in a couple of weeks?
2 weeks typically.
So they have no way of knowing if you arrived safely, what's going on. They would only get maybe like 2 letters a month or something, right?
Yeah, if it arrived.
That's just so interesting because we have such easy access to communicating. But did you find when that was normal back then with no technology, was there some peace to it?
Well, it was certainly a way of emancipating oneself from a family structure. So, and again, it was very uncommon to just take off and travel and live abroad. I was the only one I knew who did that other than my college programs and then the people I would meet on the road. But I was so drawn to it. I just had to see what else was happening. Another thing that was a huge data point for me is my first time actually living abroad in England was the first time I was able to see the United States from a different point of view. And it was a huge awakening for me. One of the most important things you gain about living abroad is to get out of the bubble you were raised in, to get out of your family, to get out of your town, to get out of your country and see the world from a different perspective, see your home, who you are from a different perspective. And living in England was the first time I really saw what the world news reported about the United States, not what the United States told American citizens about our country. And it was a very different perspective than I had ever imagined. And to the point where I often felt embarrassed to be an American, actually. But I was lucky because I grew up in Minnesota where I had a Great Lakes accent. And so people would always say, "Are you Canadian?" And I found myself saying, "Well, actually, yes, I am."
I do the same thing still. I say I'm Canadian sometimes.
I had no idea. You grow up with, your country's propaganda, and you don't realize what the reality is for the rest of the world regarding your own government and that kind of thing. So, yeah, it was very eye-opening. I think the aristocracy for hundreds of years has always had a year where when someone finishes their schooling, when they become 18, they would travel. And that is literally the best gift you can give anyone, is to allow them to travel and see the world. It's only those countries that don't want their citizens to know what's really going on that maybe discourage that kind of thing in their society. But it's the best gift you can possibly give someone, is to allow them to travel and get out of the mindset they grew up in and discover the world for themselves.
And that's what you give to Emma, because I see you with Emma and you always encourage her to like travel, follow her dream and stuff. I know that I love my parents, but for me, they weren't like they've been solo traveling also, but they also have the mentality of like when you're done with college, you go work and stay safe, security. Like I know my parents were really, really scared when I said like, "Hey, dad, mom, I'm quitting my job. I'm gonna go travel full time." For them, it was really scary. And I know you're such a good role model for Emma. But were your parents really open to this idea? Because you said that it was your first time taking the plane, the first time you traveled. So I guess you didn't travel with them so much.
My parents were not on board at all. In fact, I had wanted to go to college in Washington State to study marine biology, and they absolutely forbade it. And I was not allowed to leave Minnesota. But I did end up going to college undergrad in Iowa, which was 6 miles over the border. So I rebelled in that regard, but then I really took off after that. I think my parents, especially my mom, would have liked to have traveled, but it was just too scary for her.
Yeah.
So she was not equipped to consider learning a language or how you use foreign currency or anything like that. So, but regarding my kids, I enjoy traveling so much. In fact, after college, I had a grant to go to Norwegian folk museums and spent 6 months in Norway doing that. I went to university in Norway for a summer term. And again, back then, you couldn't just email them and say, "Hey, I'm coming," this kind of thing. There were about, I think there were close to 30 museums I was doing research at. And I had to write them letters at least 6 months ahead of time, wait
Wow.
for a response, and then I had to let them know the exact dates I was going to be arriving, and then I would mail that back 3 months in advance, and then they would respond back, and then I had to keep all those little letters with me as I was traveling to show the confirmation that I had permission to look at at the time I was looking at their textile collections. So there was a lot to do to prepare for any trip. In fact, also something you're not used to is if you wanted to go abroad, you had to apply for a visa at least 6 months ahead of time.
To
through the
every
mail.
country?
Yes. And we also actually had to have vaccinations
Oh, yeah.
because the smallpox epidemic finally came to an end in the late 70s. And it took over 300 million people worldwide. And so you had to have smallpox, tetanus, and maybe one other vaccination before you could go to most countries back then.
So you couldn't even enter the country without these vaccines.
The vaccinations, and then also you had to have visas for most places.
Wow, that's
So-
incredible. So, like for example, like someone who wanted to like had an idea like popped and he wants to travel or she wants to travel tomorrow. Was it possible or not really? Like you had to really plan no matter what, everything.
You could probably go to Canada from Minnesota if you had your passport with you, but no,
Yeah.
you had to have permission. I believe even with England, we had to apply for a student visa to be able to go to college there way ahead of time. So these are things you start planning the year before you actually take the trip.
Wow. Okay, and I have another question because earlier you talked about you had the choice to take the plane or the boat, and it was $500 value of like around $3,000 at this moment. So it's a lot of money. So I'm wondering, like at 18, where this money was coming from. How did you do it to like travel that much with money?
I worked.
Okay, while traveling.
I worked. Oh, no. I worked and saved up. I worked ahead of time. To do my junior year in England, I had 3 jobs all summer. And so I would go from one job to the next and pretty much work about 15 or 16 hours a day to save up to go on these trips. But I did it.
Yes, you did. That's amazing. And then you worked because Emma told me a little bit of your story, but you worked abroad also.
I did. I also got a job teaching English in Japan.
Wow.
And I loved that. It was so magnificent. I'm left-handed, and to suddenly be in a culture where they read from top to the bottom, but it's from right to left. It's not from left to right. And so many things finally made sense to me when I was living in Japan. And there I also traveled to South Korea. And then of course I traveled all over Japan and climbed Fuji to watch the sunrise, that kind of thing. In fact, I found it such a beautiful experience. My three kids and I later went to Japan and China and climbed Mount Fuji 25 years after I'd climbed it the first time. So all together as a family.
Yeah, that I think I was 14 when we did that. And that was such an amazing experience. And I think it's such a cool story of how you found the job in Japan. Can you describe how you found jobs back then?
I was living in Hawaii at the time and just looking I knew I didn't want to stay there indefinitely. I'd been there for probably 9 or 10 months working on a little Navy base and staying with family. And I looked in the Honolulu Times and there was just a one-line ad, teach English in Japan. So I called the number in the ad and drove into Honolulu and met with the school owner and said, yes, I'll take the job. And that was it. I knew nothing else about it. It was called the Boston English Academy because the woman who was married to the Japanese man, she was from Boston, so they named it the Boston English Academy. And then I just went and come what may.
And you said that it wasn't common because of the Vietnam War for people to travel to Asia.
Right.
Did you know anybody that had been there before you, or was this, because now Japan is such a popular country for people to travel to. Did you know anybody that had been to Japan?
I did actually. When I was in middle school, 7th or 8th grade, we had a new counselor arrive, and they had been missionaries in Japan and had 4 boys and raised their boys to that age. They were all about my age in Japan. And as soon as I heard they had been missionaries in Japan, I just lit up. And I thought, I'm doing that. In fact, the mother of, I should say, the wife of the school counselor, she and I became good friends, and she was like a mentor for me while I was growing up. She was a professor at the University of Minnesota, and she became a prized mentor for me, and she was like another mom for me. And I just knew I was going to be doing that.
Yeah, and I think just obviously knowing you as a child and as an adult now, we grew up with so much Japanese influence in our home. I feel like Japan really impacted you as a person. You collect woodblock prints and so much Japanese-inspired furniture and shojis and everything. I feel really connected to the culture because of that. What was your experience like living there? Were Japanese people used to Westerners there at the time, or what was your experience?
Not really. Again, the travel wasn't nearly as common as it is today, and I had a sense of being home, and not really understanding at the time that I probably had past lifetimes there. We've all had past lifetimes in many different countries and cultures, and that's why they ring familiar to us. That's why they feel at home. And there was something compared to the United States where everything's big and grand and aggressive in some ways and very competitive. In Japan, they have the undercurrents there for sure, but on the surface, everyone's extremely polite. Everything's delicate, and small, beautiful, delicate things are treasured over the huge things. And there's a refinement of aesthetic there that you don't find elsewhere.
Okay, I have another question because you've lived abroad in England and then you live abroad in Japan, but because right now with social media, with internet, we can it's super easy to connect with other travelers, and the hostels are super social and it's super easy to make friends abroad. How was this for you? Were you connecting more with locals, or was it was there communities of foreigners? How was it for you in the different countries?
in England, and then when I traveled afterward, I connected with young women such as myself, typically at hostels. It was and the anyone who could speak English. I had studied a few languages, but I, wasn't able to communicate very well. So, but English speakers, and I met some incredible people, and so many kids my age who had just gotten out of college or around college age did travel, and not compared to today, of course, but back then. And I would meet someone, we'd be staying in the same dorm room in a hostel. And for example, one group of 4 women from, I think they were at Vassar, and they were doing a summer abroad, and they invited me to travel with them. So I traveled for about 5 days with them. And then a young woman who was from the Middle East, I connected. I wish I could remember her name. I can see her face. She had been training to be a doctor and wanted to leave the country, but she wasn't allowed to. She was only allowed to travel with school, but came from a very, very suppressing environment, and learned so much from her. Met some just wonderful people everywhere. And it's interesting because a lot of people don't want to travel solo. And I found I had by far the richest experiences, excuse me, when I would travel solo, because when I was traveling with a friend or traveling in a group, we were really insulated and just relied on each other for visiting. And when you're by yourself, you have to open up and be vulnerable, or else you're just isolated and lost and alone. And so when I traveled solo, that's when I was also the most approachable for people. And I would approach them as well, just to be able to talk to someone else. And I met such incredible people all over the world traveling solo. And I'm sold on it today. In fact, at 67 now, I love traveling solo. I prefer it over going with a group or a friend, quite honestly.
Yeah, and that's so interesting because I know you identify as an introvert and you call yourself a hermit. And I think some people can be really intimidated to solo travel by themselves just because they maybe are more introverted and they think you have to be this extroverted, outgoing, can make friends with anybody person. How did you feel that your introverted self ever felt like that was difficult, or did it just kind of naturally happen because you're thrown into that environment? And
to this day, I still don't like going to a restaurant and eating a meal by myself. Nowadays, you can just be on your cell and pretend you're really busy, but eating in a restaurant is very different from going out and seeing a sight, or being on a plane, or a boat, or traveling somewhere and being on a site, because I found that when your path crosses with the path of someone you're meant to know, someone who you might be able to give value to, or they might give you value, you just somehow you magically connect, and your eyes meet, and a smile happens, and then you just connect, and it's someone you were meant to connect with. And so even though I probably don't eat in a lot of restaurants by myself still, I'm very happy to eat wherever on the go. It's as an introvert and basically a hermit, there's something about traveling. You're like-minded and you're with people of the same vibe, or the same, we're all drawn to the same places, and water finds its own level, and you make profound connections with people when you're traveling solo that you would miss out on otherwise.
I think Emma and I can totally relate to this because we met traveling and we have such a quick, strong connection. Like after 24 hours, we were like best friends for literally, because we spend so much time together. Because also when you're traveling, like you said, you already have a passion together because you both love traveling and you're both open to the world and you have a similar mindset already, and also you experience these amazing things with someone. So I think for like the to build a relationship, it's so powerful, and that's, I think we can both relate about like meeting people while solo traveling, how awesome it is.
Well, and to when you say build a relationship, depending on your frame of reference, either we find people who are so like-minded, there's an instant bond, or it's people sometimes literally feel like family instantly,
Yes.
and perhaps you've had past lives together. Perhaps you've known each other in a different time and place. Who knows?
Yeah.
But you're right. There are these bonds that just happen like that. And those are the people I'm talking about, where when you're meant to connect with someone, you find one another. And again, solo traveling puts you in the perfect situation in which you can meet the people you're meant to be with. When we do something in life from our intellect, like this is a job I should have, or through societal programming or whatever, and then you're in a workplace with all these other people who are doing the same job and that kind of thing, you have some kind of level of connection with them. But when you live from the heart and travel from the heart and or your gut, whatever you want to call it, and go to the places like, oh my gosh, I've always wanted to see that. I have to go there. I'm just drawn to it. And you trust in that. That's when you're not just drawn to a place. You're drawn to a frequency. You're drawn to people. You're drawn to something new you're meant to have in your life, some new perspective, some new wisdom, something you're drawn to. And when you live from the heart like that, that's when you make those profound connections.
Well, how has traveling evolved for you? Because we know, well, and, you know, Beatrice and I know that you traveled throughout your 20s. Then you had 3 kids by the time you were my age, 33. Obviously, kids can, you know, you need to be more in one place. Sorry, but not sorry, because we're besties. But how did your life change when you became a mom and you were kind of like had to be in one place? I grew up in a small town in Minnesota, the exact same town you were raised in, the exact same town my grandpa was raised in. So we're like 3 generations from this small town. How did you know, of course you probably missed traveling and that feeling. How did it evolve for you, and what was your experience?
As you know, I married someone, your dad, who loved to travel as well. And that's why we spent our honeymoon in England. And he was very much, we both had global perspectives. We weren't very provincial in how we saw the world. And I remember when you were all preschoolers and we're looking, you know, setting up kindergarten, that kind of thing for all of you. A private school had opened up in Castle Rock, actually, and we thought about enrolling you in that because it was a private school and it was supposed to be extra good and that kind of thing. But then we thought, okay, for this much money per year, and then you triple that, having all 3 of you at a private school, we could spend our summers abroad. And we both right away, that's far more educational than going to a private school. So we put you in Compañeros so that you'd have at least some different perspective.
Which was a Spanish program that I was in. So half the day was in English, half the day was in Spanish for 12 years.
Yes, so we enrolled all of you in Compañeros so that you'd have some different perspective you were picking up other than typical American Minnesotan kind of a thing. And then we knew that we wanted to travel with you. And so I knew that the best gift I could give you was to travel with you as much as possible. So we did castles in England and chateaus in France, and walked on the Great Wall in China, and climbed Fuji, as I mentioned, and went to the lake like I did as a kid.
Yeah. And I know we started doing those bigger trips when I was maybe in middle school, but those first 10 years, maybe when we're too little and it's difficult to go abroad, you got into meditation.
Yes.
And you were kind of joking about traveling in the ether? What did you say downstairs?
Oh, I said, well, when you're in a small town in Minnesota with 3 kids, uh, you don't have a lot of leisure time or a lot of freedom to go anywhere. So I started traveling in the ether instead through my meditation. I think that's a normal when you grow up in a bubble and then you break free from that bubble and you discover infinite possibilities in the world, infinite perspective, infinite opportunity, infinite ways of looking at different things. It cracks something open in you, and you're not just caught in your brain anymore. You're in your heart and you're in your gut and you're experiencing the world fullest, and it just naturally leads to something like meditation, where you as you get to know the world, you get to know yourself, and perhaps in getting to know the world, that's how you get to know yourself too. And so, yeah, I started meditating, and I was raised in a Christian church, and then shifted to Buddhism and yoga and Kundalini and what else? A bunch of different. I studied all kinds of things and shamanism so now in doing that, just like travel breaks you out of this intellectual bubble and programming you're raised in, so does meditation break you out of the limits of being a human. And so now I am traveling. I came to Bali, for example. In fact, it's a great story. I don't know if Emma's told you. I had planned on going to Bali. I was planning on going to Bali. And Emma was at the time Machu Picchu and Guatemala, and then was going to visit our daughter, our fairy goddaughter in Costa Rica, and had invited me to join her there. But I just want to go to Bali. And I didn't know why, but I knew I was meant to be here. And then out of the blue, Beatrice calls Emma and says, hey, do you want to meet me in Bali to do a podcast? And we're like, sure, this is lining up beautifully. So Emma and I traveled for a month together. And now we've been living in separate places for a month while you're doing your podcast and I'm doing online classes and things. Anyway, I knew I was drawn here because of Mount Agung, and the reason why Bali is so extraordinary, despite contemporary society and the pros and cons that come with that, it's the energy here. There are something called ley lines or dragon lines. In China, they call them dragon lines, a male line and a female line that circumnavigate the globe, and they're energy lines. And they cross here at Mount Agung, and they cross in Peru at Lake Titicaca. And those are the two, when you get two lines on any energetic grid crossing, it's called a nodal point, where they intersect, and it creates a kind of an energetic vortex. And because of these ley lines are so powerful, I know I was drawn to the island to experience that and to do some profound, deep healing that I knew was coming down the pipe at some point, but I didn't know when or how. I just trusted it would happen. And so I actually spent almost a week on Mount Agung with Emma, and then she came back to meet Beatrice, and I stayed for another 4 days just to meditate and be in that vortex. The energy was spectacular. So now at my age, after traveling as a young one and raising my kids and traveling both on the planet and in the ether for 50 years now, I am drawn to the energy centers of the world. You see the Egyptian pyramids and Uluru, the famous, what do you call that, rock in Australia. And I'm drawn to those places, and I just want to experience the energy and write about it and communicate what I experience as the energy on the planet to people. So that's what I'm drawn to. Plus, I get to eat in cool restaurants and meet neat people, but it's the energy that I want to experience in the different places in the world.
I love this way of selecting your next destination. I think it's really unique. And I think also the more you travel, the more you realize that tourist places are not like once you see it, it's done. Like you've seen it and it can take like 2 minutes and it can get not boring, but it's like it's really common. And I think the more you travel, the more you're looking for a deeper connection, a deeper reason why you will still traveling. And that's why I think the three of us were like really slow traveling and we're not like rushing with really big schedules every day. And I think we've all done it in the past. I don't know if you've done it, but I talked with it with Emma. But I think when you start traveling, it can be scary of like starting to travel and not have nothing planned. And so you want to like see the most of it in like your 2 weeks vacation, but then it's really exhausting. And then you slowly realize that traveling is more than just seeing a museum. It's more than just seeing a cool beach. I think we're human. We need this deeper connection, and I think it's super interesting that your way of choosing your next destination is really with the energy. And also before the podcast, before we started recording the podcast, you were telling us that Bali is great, but it's not the most beautiful place you've ever seen. Bali has its ups and downs, and it's not if you just look at it on the surface, it's not the most beautiful place on earth. But so many people are drawn here. So many people love Bali. The three of us, we love Bali. And your way of explaining it with energy, I think it makes so much sense. And the three of us can relate. I don't know, Emma, if you want to add something about that.
No, I can definitely relate. I mean, it has, like you said, its ups and downs, but it's the people and it's the spiritual connection and it's the community. And I think it can draw in both people that see that it's popular now and it's a trendy place to visit. But I think there's also true travelers connected to their spirituality and to other like-minded people. I mean, I've never built a community of friends. And I've lived in Hong Kong, I lived in Macau, I've lived in Switzerland, and now just being in Bali, I built a community the first time I came here, which was last fall, in days. Mm-hmm. And every time I come back here, there's always this, sometimes it's new people, sometimes it's the same people, but the community that I built here has grown so fast and so quickly just because we're all very similar mindset. And so I think it's a really unique place that travelers come and just like you are drawn to the energy and the spirituality of it.
Well, I think whenever we're in alignment with our authentic self, who we really are, and it can take some digging and searching to figure that out in life. But when you finally self-actualize to the point where you know who you are, and you start walking one foot in front of the other, aligned with who you are, that's when your community just appears. You find them and you find each other. And and so it doesn't, to have a place like this where it's set up for travelers, like a hostel. A hostel is, that's why we connect with people in those places. It's super affordable. But those are, again, where these paths of alignment intersect one another, and that's when we find the most meaningful relationships.
Yeah, and speaking of lines, because you were talking about the dragon lines and everything, Bali is unique for me personally because in astrocartography, my Jupiter line goes straight through the island of Bali. And I mean,
What's the Jupiter line again?
So this is one of my really good friends, Steffi. Jupiter line, astrocartography is all personal. You can do your chart, your birth time and everything to find where you might experience the most love or the most abundance or the most success in your career. And you have these lines going through different countries on the planet or even the ocean. And Jupiter line, I'm like really not an expert on this. All I know, it's a good line, people, trust me. But one of my really good friends, her Instagram is Spirit Sis. She does professional astrocartography readings, and she basically says Jupiter line is one of your most powerful lines, one of your most powerful places, and it's really lucky in abundance, maybe? Anyway, mine goes through Bali, and I feel the effects from that. Because, like I said, I've traveled to a lot of places, and you don't always have this same feeling that you necessarily do. And I have that in Bali. That's my last train of thought.
Well, again, I think once we figure out who we really are and we can start being our authentic selves, that's when we find these places and find what we align with. Bali has been extraordinary for me and absolutely a priceless experience. I had another similar experience energetically a little over a year ago. I was in England this last year studying at the Royal School of Needlework. But before that, in the fall before, I went to Scotland because I was drawn to the Clonish stones on the Isle of Lewis. And that's a place for me where I found alignment. And I didn't align with humans, but I aligned with these stones. Each was a portal, literally. And I don't know, take that however you want to, but there was something so magical about them. I have probably 100 pictures of stones on my phone right now with the moss and the lichen growing on them. And the energies were so spectacular that it just played out in their physicality and how they've eroded over the last 1,000 or how many years. And so for me, maybe that's what makes me comfortable as an introvert and a hermit, is that I find myself connecting with rocks and trees at this age, almost more than I do people. But I have a lot of wonderful people in my life, don't get me wrong.
I'm curious to know where this interest into energies and the lines on Earth, because I don't know a lot about this. Where is this coming from? Is there a trip or something that happened in your life that draw you to this?
I just think life it can be a school of hard knocks at times. And so I've had enough experience in my life that made me really question the mentalities I was raised in and how I grew up. And also I love an adventure. I love exploring new things. I love learning new things. I find a box, like living in a box, to be very stifling. And so, I forgot what she asked me.
Where this interest of energy.
Okay. And I found that the more I turned within, the happier I was, the more I found. It was all pretty much, it started to be just out shoveling stuff out. I don't want to be this. I don't want to be that. I don't want that in me anymore. And the more I did that, the happier I was and the lighter I was. And honestly, through meditation, this sounds exceptional, but I started remembering past lifetimes. I started channeling things. I started doing a lot of things that I never, ever, ever dreamed were real before. And they certainly are. So, and now, and I've written a book about my experience. It's called The Sacred Bridge Within. And it's basically directly from my journals that I've written over the last 25 years. Just talking about how I moved from school of thought to school of thought. And every time I delved deeper, I learned more about myself and started making choices as to who I want to be and who I don't want to be. And just to get it out there for anyone that would benefit from it, I started a blog, whitelotusreflections.com. And the whole book's on there, so you can read it if you have interest. And now that I've put it all out there, I'm just starting to blog once a week. On Fridays, I put out a new post and just about any impressions I have or things I'm learning and exploring and possibility.
I think a lot of people can be really interested by this, and I think we can all learn. Even if Emma and I have a lot of experience in solo traveling, you're the queen, and and we can learn a lot from you. And I'm sure, I haven't seen it yet, but I'm sure your book and your blog are really inspiring. And I think it's nice that you share your story to other people, and it's part of human connections, of sharing stories and learning from everybody else's experiences. So definitely we'll put the link of your website and your book in the description of the episode.
So, of course, I'm your daughter, so I know everything about you. But something I find really interesting and inspiring is you moving abroad last year to England for the second time and pursuing your needlework at the Royal School of Needlework, which is the premier needlework school. And they make the costumes for Bridgerton, which we love Bridgerton. Can you tell us what inspired that move? Because I think a lot of people think if you don't travel when you're younger, you miss your opportunity. But you're such a good example of traveling at any age and like taking risks and moving abroad. I mean, you decided to move to England like within 2 days, and then in a couple weeks you were there. So what led to that experience?
Well, it wasn't quite that quick, but
That was a little dramatic.
Beatrice asked a minute ago if something in my life happened to make me want to meditate and things like that. And I think for me, maybe I'm just a slow learner or something, but when it's time for me to shift gears or do something else, if I don't just do it, the universe encourages me in a no nonsense manner. And for me, I had, I'm in my late 60s and I'd had a hip replaced, and I'd been in real estate, for my whole career, and the real estate market was again going down a bit, and I wasn't quite sure how I wanted to proceed with my life. And so I was walking on the beach one day just to clear my head as I do on a daily basis, but there were huge waves that day. There were 12 to 15 feet, and I hadn't really been around that kind of wave action before. And also, I was in Ventura at the time, and there had been so much rain over the holidays, and this was on January 5th. And there had been so much rain that the rivers were flooding and the roads were washing out. And I liked to hike down to the bird sanctuary. I went barefoot even though it was about 50 degrees outside, because I like to earth and feel the sand under my feet. And I was walking down to the bird sanctuary, and the bird sanctuary, which was a big lake that ran kind of parallel to the ocean, there had been so much flooding that the river that fed that washed out the whole ocean bank and the land in between the river and the ocean. And so there was a huge torrential river running into the ocean. And so I came down to the point where the river now met the ocean, and I was looking for sea glass and just enjoying the being outside. And there was a woman probably 10 or 15 feet from me with a dog who was playing fetch and stuff. So it was just normal, not anything to worry about. And suddenly this huge rogue wave comes and sweeps across this whole point where she and I and her dog were standing. And she was a lot taller than I am. I'm 5'5", and she was close to 6 feet. And she and her dog started running, and I started running too. But then a second wave came that was on top of the first rogue wave, and it was all the way up to my hips. And it was so powerful and so fast that it knocked me off my feet and washed me across this point and into this flooding river that was so wavy. It looked like it was the color of coffee. It was so dark and muddy. And I swept across this beach, and instantly my head was clear though. And I thought, oh, maybe this is the way I'm going to die. I might die today. And it plunged me over this ledge and into this river and whipped me out into the ocean. But somewhere out there, because the river was so powerful, it was building up a sandbar a bit out into the ocean where those huge waves were coming in that day. And I had just been trying to, keep on swimming.
My mom is the least panicky person I've ever met. No panic.
Well, they say when a riptide takes you out, you're supposed to swim perpendicular to the current so that you can get to the edge of it. And that's what I was doing. And all of a sudden out there, I hit this sandbar and I started rolling because I was going so swiftly. I rolled, but I finally braced myself on all fours and then managed to paddle and make my way away from this river. And ironically, I looked and these waves had kind of backed off a bit, so it gave me enough time to get back up to shore and then hike to my car about 3/4 of a mile down and drove home. And Emma was there doing Pilates, and she said, "How was the beach, Mom?" And I said, "I had an incident," something like that. Anyway, turns out I had hiked back on a broken leg, and I was all cut up and stuff, but the cool thing about it was, and ultimately went to the ER. I couldn't imagine my leg was broken, so we waited for 5 days. Emma got me crutches and stuff, and waited for 5 days till I finally had an X-ray. And then when she picked me up, again, because it was still COVID, so she didn't come into the hospital with them. When she picked me up, I was laughing. I go, "I have a broken leg." Anyway, but I got such an extraordinary gift from that experience, and that is, it's like whoever I wasn't had washed out to sea and has never come back again. And I was literally empty-headed. There's no other word to describe it. I was blank. I was just like this hollow vessel or blank canvas, and I'd never been happier. I mean, I was in a wheelchair with a broken leg and stuff, but I was so happy. And I started, weirdly, before the holidays, I had gotten all these little cross-stitch patterns to make Christmas ornaments, and I hadn't cross-stitched since the kids were little. And I started cross-stitching, and I was the happiest I could imagine, because I knew I couldn't go to work because it was COVID anyway. And I had not a thought in the world, not a care in the world. And this went on for several weeks until I was on TikTok and I saw this RSN, this Royal School of Needlework, and instantly I knew that's where I'm going. I signed up for my certificate and diploma there and got a hotel. It was a little apartment at the Palace Stables, and it's where they filmed Bridgerton too, so it was really fun. But anyway, I ended up going there for 6 months and got my certificate and almost finished with my diploma. I just have a few things I'm working on, but finished all the coursework. And those are the kinds of experiences I'm talking about. The School of Hard Knocks, where if you get off course, trust me, the universe will put you back on course if you pay attention. So does that answer your question?
Yes, it totally answered my question, and I think I can really relate to that because I don't know if I've talked about it during the podcast, but I used to be a teacher. And a teacher, you're working maybe 30 hours a week, and I was almost at the edge of a burnout. I was exhausted. I was so unaligned with my true purpose and what I truly needed to do that it was like draining all of my energy. I had no energy. I was tired 24/7. Even if I was working half of what I'm working right now. Right now I'm working every single day, like so much, but I have so much energy, and I think Emma can acknowledge this. Like, I have so much energy. It's crazy. I never had that much energy, but I think it's because of that. It's because I'm so aligned with what the universe wants me to do that everything just falls into places and it just goes so naturally. So I can 100% relate to that. I think we're gonna finish up the episode. Thank you so much, Wendy. We will probably have you for a part 2 because you are so interesting. You have so much like to tell and share to the world. I think we're definitely gonna do a part 2. Emma is saying yes. I have one last question for you, and we do this with all of our guests. If you had do you have one tip to give to anyone who wants to start solo traveling or is at the beginning of their journey as a solo traveler, especially as women, because I think it's different, a woman or a man? Do you have like one tip you would like to share?
Just do it. Let go of all your fears. Be circumspect. Be brave. And you'll have boundless benefit from that? Boundless. Just do it. Just get out there and do it. Pick some. If it's too scary, I don't know. Go to the next town and explore that by yourself. Go to an activity. Start doing things. But the key is do what you feel like doing, not what you think you should or ought to do. So do what you feel like doing and start it today.
That's such good advice. I'm so grateful that you're my mom. I'm so grateful that we have you here because I feel like we're pretty pro for our age and stage, but I just listen to you and I'm like, dang, she knows what she's talking about. She's been through it and it's so inspiring. And I think a lot of people will benefit from hearing your perspective from a mother figure because you do have that energy for everybody. And we were downstairs talking and there were like 5 or 6 people from all around the world living in our house just listening to her speak. And it's just very inspiring. And so thank you for joining us. You have been such an incredible guest.
I'm honored to be here.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, so thank you. We will definitely have you on another episode, and we hope you enjoyed this week. See you next time.